There are moments in a man's life that don't fade. They don't yellow with time like newspaper clippings or blur like photographs left too long in the sun. They stay sharp, crystal. And I'm telling you tonight about one of those moments. A September night in 1959 when Ray Charles sat down at a piano in an empty radio station in St. Louis and played something I've never heard before or since. Something he said he'd been carrying inside him for years, waiting for the right time to let it out. I was 27 years old then, still green enough to think I understood the world, still young enough to believe that truth was something you could simply report. But that night, Ray taught me something different. He taught me that some truths can only be played, never spoken. And what I witnessed in that room, in those stolen hours past midnight, changed the way I heard music forever. Let me take you back there. September in St. Louis that year was the kind of humid that made your shirt stick to your back the moment you stepped outside. The air hung thick and heavy, pregnant with the last gasp of summer. I was working as a correspondent then, bouncing between cities, chasing stories, trying to make a name for myself in a business that chewed up young men and spit them out before they'd learned to tie a proper Windsor knot. The station, KMOX, sat in a brick building downtown, wedged between a haberdashery that smelled like mothballs and a diner that served coffee strong enough to strip paint. Third floor, narrow hallways, that peculiar scent every radio station had back then, cigarette smoke, electrical heat, and the faint metallic tang of recording equipment warming up. The walls were painted that institutional green they seemed to use everywhere in those days, and the overhead lights flickered just enough to remind you that nothing lasts forever. I'd been sent to interview Ray Charles. Now, you have to understand, in 1959, Ray was just beginning to break through in a way that couldn't be ignored anymore. What I say had hit that summer like a thunderclap. You couldn't turn on a radio without hearing it. But he wasn't yet the legend he'd become. He was still hungry, still proving himself, still young enough that you could see the fire in him, the drive, the absolute refusal to be anything less than exactly who he was. The interview was scheduled for 8 o'clock, standard stuff, 20 minutes, maybe 30 if we were lucky. My producer, a chain-smoking man named Morty with permanent ink stains on his fingers, had given me the usual list of safe questions: touring schedule, new album, influences, that sort of thing. Keep it clean, he'd said. No controversy, no politics, just music. I'd prepared my questions on index cards, sitting in a coffee shop that afternoon, trying to think of something that wouldn't bore Ray Charles to death. Everyone asked the same things. How'd you learn to play? What's it like being blind? Where do you get your inspiration? As if genius could be explained in a radio-friendly soundbite. I got to the station early. I always did. Nerves mostly. I'd set up in Studio B, the smaller of our two recording rooms, cramped and windowless, with a table, 2 chairs, and microphones that looked like they'd survived the war. The walls were covered in that acoustic foam that made the room feel like being inside someone's lung. Close, intimate. Every sound you made felt amplified and lonely at the same time. At 7:45, I heard them coming down the hall. First, voices. His manager, a white man named Jeff, with a Boston accent, and a briefcase that clicked when he walked. Then a sound I'd come to know, the tap, tap, tap of Ray's cane against linoleum, a rhythm all its own, confident and steady. And then laughter, Ray's laughter. It was the first thing that struck me about him, even before I saw him. This rolling, genuine, full-bodied laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. The kind of laugh that made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't know the joke. The door opened. "Mr. Charles," I said, standing up too quickly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Ray," he corrected, and there was that smile. God, what a smile. The dark glasses, those iconic Ray-Bans that would become his trademark, caught the overhead light. He wore a suit, charcoal gray with thin pinstripes, perfectly tailored, a white shirt, crisp as fresh snow, and a thin black tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him was sharp, intentional, put together. But it was his hands I noticed most. Long fingers, constantly moving, as if even when he wasn't playing, he was hearing music somewhere inside himself, keeping time to a rhythm only he could hear. Jeff helped him to the chair across from me. Ray settled in with the ease of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. He tilted his head slightly, listening, taking in the room, reading it in ways I couldn't begin to understand. "Small studio," he said. "Good acoustics, though. I can hear the dead space. No windows, right?" "No windows," I confirmed. "Best kind of room for truth," he said, and smiled again. "Can't look outside and get distracted." We started the interview. I asked my questions. He gave his answers. Professional, polished. The kind of responses he'd probably given 100 times before. Yes, the tour was going well. Yes, the new album was something he was proud of. Yes, music had always been his first language. He was charming, funny, self-deprecating in that way that made you like him immediately. But there was something, I don't know, something held back, like he was giving me the performance of Ray Charles, talking about Ray Charles, not the man himself. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Jeff checked his watch, gave me the signal. "Time to wrap up. Mr. Charles, Ray, thank you so much for your time," I said, reaching to turn off the recording equipment. "That it?" He asked. Well, yes, unless there's something else you'd like to add. He leaned back in his chair, those fingers still moving, tapping against his knee. You ever notice, he said slowly, how everybody wants to interview Ray Charles, the blind piano player, but nobody ever wants to just talk to Ray? I stopped, my hand hovering over the switch. What do you mean? I mean, all those questions you ask. They're fine, they're professional, but they're not about anything real. They're about the package, the product. Ray Charles, the recording artist. He paused. You got plans tonight? No, not really. You play anything. Instrument, a little harmonica. Nothing serious. Harmonica. He brightened. That's a good instrument. Honest instrument. Can't fake it on a harmonica. He stood up, felt for his cane. Jeff, you head back to the hotel. I'm going to stay here a bit. Jeff looked uncertain. Ray, you've got the show tomorrow night. You need rest. I'll rest when I'm dead. Go on, I'm fine. But Jeff, Ray's voice was gentle but firm. Go on. Jeff looked at me, then back at Ray, then shrugged in that universal gesture of a man who knows he's not going to win an argument. I'll have the car come back at midnight. Make it 2. After Jeff left, the room felt different, bigger somehow, despite its small size. Ray stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, that internal rhythm still keeping time inside him. You got a piano in this place, he asked. In Studio A. The big room. Show me. Studio A was at the end of the hall, larger than Studio B, with a proper control booth separated by glass, and in the corner, covered with a cloth tarp, an old upright piano. It had been there since before I'd arrived at the station. Nobody played it much. The keys were yellowed, some of them stuck, and it was probably half a note out of tune, but it was a piano. I pulled off the tarp, dust motes swirling in the lamplight. Ray made his way over, cane sweeping side to side, and when he found the bench, he sat down with a sigh of something like relief. His hands went to the keys immediately, not playing yet, just touching them, feeling them. Old, he said, probably from the 20s. Hardwood case, been moved a lot. His fingers pressed down on middle C. The note rang out slightly flat. He smiled. Needs tuning, but she's got character. All the best pianos have character. He played a few scales, listening, adjusting. Then he stopped. You mind if I ask you something, he said. Of course not. Why'd you become a journalist? I hadn't expected that. I suppose because I wanted to tell stories, to find truth and report it. Truth. He turned the word over like a stone. What's true about those questions you asked me earlier? I felt heat in my face. I was doing my job. I know. I'm not criticizing. I'm just asking. What'd you learn about me? About Ray, the man sitting in front of you? I didn't have an answer. See, here's the thing. He continued, his hands beginning to move over the keys, not playing anything in particular, just exploring. People think because I can't see, I must be missing something, like the world is somehow less for me. But I'll tell you a secret. I hear things. I hear everything. The way your voice tightened when you asked about being blind, the way you shuffled your papers when you thought I'd given a boring answer, the way the air in that little room felt nervous, like you were afraid of saying the wrong thing. The piano notes were getting more intentional now, a progression, a melody starting to form. And you know what I heard most? I heard a young man trying real hard to do his job right, trying to be professional, trying not to offend, but not trying to connect. Not really. His fingers found a chord, then another. Blues progression, 12 bar, the oldest story in American music. This here, he said, this is how I tell truth. And then he started to play. I don't have the words to properly describe what came out of that piano. If I did, I wouldn't need to be telling you this story. I could just write it down and you'd understand. But music doesn't work that way. Music lives in the moment. It breathes and dies and is gone, except in memory. What Ray played wasn't a song. Not exactly. It was more like a conversation. His right hand singing out a melody, slow, mournful, aching, while his left hand kept time with these deep, resonant bass notes that you felt in your chest more than heard. The upright's out-of-tune strings somehow made it better, gave it a raw, honest quality. Like tears sound different than laughter, even though they both come from the same place. He played for maybe 5 minutes, maybe an hour. Time stopped meaning anything. His whole body moved with the music. That sway everyone who ever saw Ray Charles perform remembered. But this was different. This wasn't performance. This was prayer or confession or both. When he finished, his hands stayed on the keys, the final note hanging in the air until it faded into nothing. The silence afterward was so complete, I could hear the building settling, pipes cooling in the walls, the distant hum of the city outside. You feel that? That's what I'm trying to do. Every time I play, every time I sing, I'm trying to make you feel something so specific, so particular, that it becomes universal. You understand? I said I did, though I'm not sure I fully understood then. Not the way I do now. Ray stood up, stretched his back. You got any coffee in this place? I can make some? Good. Let's have some coffee and talk. Really talk. Not interview, just talk, man to man. We ended up in the break room, a sorry little space with a hot plate, a percolator that had seen better days, and a card table with 3 mismatched chairs. I made the coffee, strong and black, the way he said he liked it. And we sat there in that fluorescent-lit room that smelled like old cigarettes and burnt coffee grounds. And Ray Charles told me things I never reported, never wrote down, never shared until now. He told me about growing up in Florida, about going blind at 7. Not all at once, he said, but gradually, like watching the sun set over the course of months. First, the colors started draining out, he said, everything getting grayer. Then the details, faces becoming blurs. And then one morning I woke up and there was nothing, just darkness. And I remember thinking, well, this is it. This is the world now. He told me about his mother, how she refused to let him feel sorry for himself. She'd make me do chores, he said, smiling at the memory. Washing dishes, chopping wood, everything sighted kids did. I'd complain and she'd say, Ray, you lost your sight. You didn't lose your hands. You didn't lose your mind. So get to work. Toughest love I ever got. But it saved my life. He told me about discovering music, how the piano was the first thing that made sense after he lost his vision. The keys don't move, he said. 88 keys, always in the same place. You can trust them. And the sounds are honest. You hit a key wrong, it tells you. You hit it right, it sings. No lies in a piano. We talked about race. We had to. It was 1959 in America, and Ray Charles was a black man traveling through a country that couldn't decide if it wanted to celebrate him or kill him. He'd been refused service at restaurants, denied rooms at hotels, told to use back entrances at venues where thousands of white people paid to see him perform. It's exhausting, he said simply, having to prove your humanity over and over, having to smile when someone treats you like dirt because getting angry would be uppity, having to be twice as good to get half the respect. He sipped his coffee. But you know what? It also makes you sharp, makes you see through the nonsense. When you can't rely on people treating you right just because you learn to judge character quick, you learn who's real and who's performing. He asked about my life, where I was from, what I'd seen, what I wanted to do with this career. And I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone, about growing up in Missouri, about wanting to be a writer but ending up in radio, about the fear that I'd spend my whole life chasing stories but never actually living one. You're living one right now, he said. You just don't know it yet. The clock on the wall said 1:30. We'd been talking for hours. The coffee pot was empty. The building was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the occasional creak of the old structure breathing around us. Come on, Ray said suddenly, standing up. I want to play you something else. Back in Studio A, he settled at the piano again. This time he didn't say anything. He just started playing. At 2 in the morning, Jeff came back with the car. Ray shook my hand at the door, a firm, warm handshake, the kind that means something. And then he was gone, tapping his way down the hall, his laughter echoing back to me one last time. I went back to Studio A. The piano sat there, silent now, the bench slightly askew where Ray had left it. I sat down, put my fingers on the keys, pressed middle C. The flat note rang out, same as before, but somehow it sounded different now. Richer, fuller, like it had absorbed something from the hours Ray had spent coaxing music from it. I never reported that night, never wrote about it professionally. It didn't seem right somehow. It was too private, too personal. The interview we'd recorded earlier, the professional one that aired the next week, standard stuff, nothing special. Nobody listening would have known that afterward. Ray Charles stayed and played piano for no one but me and talked about life and music and truth until the small hours of the morning. But I carried it with me. Every story I covered after that, every interview I conducted, every time I sat behind a microphone trying to find the right words, I remembered that night. I remembered Ray's lesson that truth isn't always in the facts. Sometimes it's in the feeling. Sometimes it's in the space between the notes. I saw Ray a few more times over the years, from a distance mostly, at concerts, on television. Once at a press conference in New York where he didn't remember me. Why would he? I was just one of thousands of journalists he'd talked to. But I remembered him. Every time I heard his voice on the radio, every time I heard Georgia on My Mind, or Hit the Road Jack, or I Can't Stop Loving You, I thought about that September night in St. Louis. He's gone now, has been for years. The world mourned Ray Charles, the legend, the icon, the genius. And that's right, that's proper. He deserved all of it. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I mourn something different. I mourn those stolen hours in an empty radio station, the coffee and paper cups, the sound of an out-of-tune piano being played by the best musician I ever met, the generosity of a young man at the height of his powers, taking the time to teach a green kid reporter something about listening, about really listening. You know, they say Ray Charles revolutionized American music. that he broke down barriers between genres, between sacred and secular, between black music and white music. They say he changed everything, and that's all true. But what I learned that night was something smaller and bigger at the same time. I learned that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it happens in empty rooms with bad coffee and old pianos. Sometimes it's just one person deciding to be generous with their time, their talent, their truth. Sometimes it's just Ray. I'm an old man now, older than Ray ever got to be, and I've forgotten so much. Names, dates, faces, stories I covered that seemed important at the time, but turned out to be footnotes. But I haven't forgotten that night. I can still hear the sound of his cane tapping down the hallway. Still hear his laugh, warm and genuine. Still hear those first few notes floating out from that old upright, slightly out of tune, absolutely perfect. That's what music does, if you let it. It marks time. It marks your life. It gives you a way to remember not just what happened, but how it felt. Ray Charles taught me that. And if somewhere, somehow he can hear this, if there's a piano up there he's playing, making that music that lives between joy and sorrow, I hope he knows. I listened, Ray. I really listened, and I heard you.